On weekends, he returned to the community, not as a judge, but as Micah. He walked the neighborhoods where his father used to preach, where his mother once tended to the sick with quiet hands. He taught workshops at the local center he helped fund, the Quiet Stand, where young people learned their rights and worth. He sat with kids who had been suspended, arrested, dismissed. And he didn't lecture them. He listened. One boy asked him once, "Sir, are you ever scared when you walk into court?" Micah smiled faintly and replied, "Scared? No. But I am responsible. I know what happens when the wrong people are silent and the right people never get heard." His grandmother, Miss Thelma, had passed by then, but her picture sat in his office next to the flag. He never forgot what she told him. "Baby, if the law won't protect you, learn it better than they do. And when it's your turn, you protect somebody else." He lived that, every ruling, every nod. He honored a promise every time he took the time to pronounce a name correctly, pause before judgment, and hold space for pain without being consumed. Not just to his parents, but to every person who'd ever been told their lives were too messy, too complicated, too black, too poor, too angry, too much. He didn't rewrite the law. He reclaimed it. For them. For us. For what justice still can be, when someone like Micah James dares to sit where justice once refused to stand. After years in courtrooms and chambers, Micah James did something unexpected. He came home, not to retire, but to plant. The boy who had once witnessed justice denied returned as a man determined to help others shape the justice they deserved. But he didn't come back to make speeches or soak in praise. He returned to listen, teach, and give tools to those without any. The building he chose wasn't new. It had once been an old grocery store, windows boarded, roof sagging. Some said it was a poor choice, but Micah saw what others didn't. Potential. He poured his savings, his time, and his reputation into it. When it reopened, the sign read, "The Quiet Stand." It wasn't a courtroom, though it changed verdicts. It wasn't a church, though it restored faith. It was something in between, a space where young people learned not just their rights, but how to survive being underestimated, where adults learned that silence could be a choice, not a sentence, and where no one was treated like they were too far gone. He didn't walk in wearing a robe. He walked in with humility. Jeans, rolled-up sleeves, a notebook in one hand, and a quiet gaze told you he saw more than you let on. His first rule was simple. This place is not here to fix you. It's here to remind you you were never broken. Micah taught more than the law. He taught composure. He taught how to hold your ground without losing your peace, how to de-escalate without backing down. How do you respond when someone calls you a slur? How do you ask for a badge number without trembling? How do you walk into a bank, a courtroom, or a college interview like you belong? Because you do. He invited local police officers into the space, not to control it, but to be part of the learning. Some refused. Some came and sat in the back, arms crossed. But over time, some listened. And then, some changed. He worked with high schools to bring in students suspended for attitude problems. He listened to their stories. A boy who pushed a desk because the teacher mocked his stutter. A girl arrested for defending her little brother in the hallway. He didn't excuse their actions, but taught them how to turn reaction into power and make their presence mean something more than fear. One of his most popular workshops was called The Second Breath. In it, he taught people what to do in the moment after being provoked. That sliver of time between insult and response. He said, in that breath, you get to decide if you write the next part of the story, or by the one trying to make you fall. Word spread. Not fast, not loud, but deep. Teachers came, then parents, then young men who once laughed at him in school hallways, but now walked their sons through the same doors, hoping to give them what they never had, someone to show them another way. Micah didn't call what he did mentorship. He called it the reclamation of time, self, and narrative. He said, "The system won't always change fast enough, but we can prepare each other to walk through it with our dignity intact." 3 seconds. 4 gunshots. A black boy curled into himself on the back seat, too small to stop it, too awake to forget it. Not even 3 seconds. That's all it took to rip his world apart. His father's body slumped forward. His mother's hand was still reaching for her ID. And just like that, love was gone, and law said nothing. That boy, Micah James, 10 years old. From that day on, he didn't cry, he didn't scream, he remembered. And years later, when the system tried to push him again, he didn't raise his voice. He stood, and the whole room watched history shift. They shot his father through the windshield. Broad daylight, 3 witnesses, no indictment. His mother died beside him, slumped in the driver's seat, blood blooming like a rose across her chest. 10-year-old Micah James sat frozen in the back, a juice box in one hand, his childhood in the other. No one went to prison. No one said sorry. The world just moved on. Except Micah. 7 years later, that boy walks into a high school cafeteria with the same silence he's worn ever since. He isn't angry, he isn't loud, but he carries something beneath his skin, a stillness sharpened by grief. When the sheriff's son blocks his seat, laughing like it's a game, Micah doesn't flinch. He steps forward, and in the 10 seconds that follow, everything changes. Not because he strikes back, he doesn't have to. Sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one who's done surviving. It happened on a Sunday in July, the kind of southern evening where the light turns gold just before it disappears, and the cicadas hum like a warning. 10-year-old Micah James sat in the back seat of his parents' car, clutching a new book his mother had bought him at the church fair. It was still warm from her hands. The family had just finished delivering groceries to a low-income community near Selma. No cameras, no crowd, just kindness done quietly, like they always did. They were half a mile from home when the flashing lights appeared behind them. His father, Reverend Elijah James, pulled over like he was trained to. Hands on the wheel, calm voice, no sudden movements. Micah's mother, Renee, a nurse with gentle eyes and a habit of humming while she drove, reached for her purse to grab her license. She didn't get there in time. 4 shots tore through the windshield before anyone said a word. Micah heard the glass before he heard the bullets. He saw the blood before he heard himself scream. And then, nothing. Just the weight of silence. His father's body slumped forward, his head turned slightly as if still trying to meet his son's eyes. His mother's body slumped sideways, her hand still half lifted in defense. The officers didn't shout. They didn't call for backup. They didn't check pulses. They stood there, guns still raised, faces blank. Later, the report called it a misidentification, a split-second error. They said the Reverend's silhouette matched a suspect. No weapon was found, and no charges were filed. The footage mysteriously went missing. The public was told to move on, but Micah never did. They buried Elijah and Renee James 2 days before Micah's 11th birthday. He didn't cry during the funeral, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. It was like something inside him had frozen, gone still. He sat in the front row, his suit too big, his eyes too old, and his hands folded like his father used to when he prayed. And when the casket closed, it wasn't just his parents that were taken. It was the sound of safety, the smell of cornbread, the way his mother rubbed his shoulder when he had trouble sleeping. It was his childhood. Micah went to live with his grandmother, Miss Thelma, a woman made of iron and gospel, who'd marched in Montgomery when she was 17 and never apologized for surviving. She didn't try to comfort him with empty words. She didn't say things would be okay. She handed him a notebook and a pen and told him, "Write it down before the world tries to write over you." Miss Thelma's house was small, but it held things that couldn't be measured in square feet: discipline, dignity, and quiet resilience that didn't need to be spoken to be felt. She'd sit Micah down at the kitchen table each morning before school with a hot biscuit and a truth. "They'll look at your skin before your eyes, baby, so make sure they see your mind before they speak." She didn't raise her voice. She raised expectations. And Micah, with his notebook and silence, began to rebuild himself, not as a victim, but as a vessel of memory sharpened by purpose. He wrote every night. He wrote about the way the air smelled that day. He wrote about the badge number he memorized. He wrote about the emptiness, the quiet, the sharp way people avoided looking him in the eye afterward. He wrote to remember, because he knew if he didn't, no one else would. But even as a boy, he understood something most grown men still don't. That anger, if left unchecked, becomes a second bullet. And Micah refused to carry a weapon for them. So instead, he read. He read Baldwin and King. He studied court cases and watched trials on public access TV. He read the Constitution like it was a prayer he wasn't ready to believe in, but couldn't afford to ignore. He didn't vow revenge. He vowed clarity. He didn't dream of power. He dreamed of understanding the rules so deeply they could no longer be used against him. Selma moved on, as places do. Another boy has gone quiet. Another black family buried beneath apologies. But Micah didn't disappear. He sharpened. He observed. And beneath that silence grew something dangerous. Not rage, but discipline. A kind of strength that doesn't announce itself until it's necessary. He didn't speak much, but when he did, people leaned in. There was weight in his voice, not because it was loud, but because it had been earned. It had passed through fire. He was no longer just a boy who had seen too much. He was a witness sharpening into a force, not a weapon, a verdict waiting to be spoken. They didn't just kill his parents. They tried to erase the very idea that kindness could exist in black skin without being punished for it. They tried to end a story. Instead, they ignited one. And Micah? He's been writing the ending ever since. By 17, Micah James no longer moved through the world like a boy. He carried himself like a man who had lived twice, with the calm that unsettles those who mistake silence for weakness. His shoulders were broad, not just from age, but from the weight of memory, and his eyes, still, observant, held the kind of patience forged only in grief and discipline. He wasn't invisible at school, but people didn't know what to do with him. He was too composed, too still, as if he'd seen something they hadn't, because he had. He didn't speak unless he had something worth saying. He never showed off, but he paid attention to how people looked over their shoulders in crowded hallways, the teacher who flinched when challenged, and the boys who laughed too loud when no one else was laughing. He moved through the world like a man walking through glass, aware that one wrong step could cut, but knowing he'd been cut before and survived. It was lunchtime when it happened. Like most high school cafeterias, the cafeteria was loud, with the sound of trays, sneakers, gossip, and insecurity. Micah usually sat near the window, not because it was quiet, but because it gave him a view, That day, the seat was open, but something was off. A backpack had been tossed across the bench, blocking the space. Ownership is claimed not by presence, but by entitlement. Micah approached, tray in hand. He looked at the bag, then at the boy beside it. Logan Price, senior, linebacker, known more for his father's badge than his name. Micah didn't glare. He didn't frown. He just asked, "Mind moving your bag?" Logan looked up slowly, a grin spreading across his face like spilled oil. "You serious?" he said. Micah nodded. "Just need the seat." Logan laughed and turned to his friends. "Look at this. The preacher kid wants his throne back." The cafeteria was already listening. Micah stayed still. "It's a seat. I'm not here to argue." But Logan wasn't interested in seats. He was interested in scenes. He stood up, too fast, too close. "What? You think you're better than us now?" he asked. "Walking around like you've got your soundtrack playing?" Micah didn't blink. "I'm just trying to eat." Logan shoved him. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't small. It was loud, meant to provoke, meant to shake. But Micah didn't stumble. He didn't swing. He stepped back, controlled and exact, shifting his weight to absorb the motion. Then, almost effortlessly, he guided Logan's force against him. A pivot of the hip, a lift of the arm. Logan lost his balance and hit the floor hard, the tray clattering beside him. Silence fell. Even the lunch monitors froze. Micah didn't raise his fists. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Don't touch me again." And that was it. 10 seconds. One shove. One shift. And a message delivered so clearly that no one needed it repeated. Phones captured it. Whispers repeated it. But what lingered wasn't the fall. It was how Micah stood. With poise. With purpose. With outrage. An hour later, the assistant principal pulled him aside. Micah sat there calmly, recounting everything. No drama, no defensiveness, just the truth. "He pushed me. Twice. I asked him not to. I responded without hurting him." "You practiced that move?" the principal asked, not unkindly. "I practiced control," Micah replied. When the video spread, people didn't know what to call it. Some said he flipped the bully. Others said he was a ninja. But those who understood, those who'd ever had to choose between silence or explosion, saw something different. They saw power in restraint. That day didn't just change Logan, it changed the school. Teachers spoke more carefully. Students sat up straighter. Not because they were afraid, but because something invisible had shifted. Micah hadn't demanded respect. He had modeled it. And in doing so, he forced the room to rise to his level. He didn't want attention. But he became the conversation. Not because he yelled, but because he stood. Not because he fought, but because he refused to surrender. That night, back at home, his grandmother didn't praise him. She nodded, handed him a bowl of gumbo and said, "I heard you stood tall today." "I didn't want to hurt him," Micah said. "You didn't," she replied. "You just reminded them you could." Later that week, Logan avoided the cafeteria. People looked at Micah differently, not with fear, curiosity, or admiration. Some whispered, others smiled, and a few, those who had felt invisible their whole lives, started sitting straighter, walking a little taller. Micah never bragged. He didn't post the video, but he knew something had shifted, and for the first time since the night he lost everything, he felt it again. Not safety, not peace, but the faint, growing pulse of dignity. He hadn't fought back. He had simply drawn a line, and made the world think twice before stepping over it. By the time Micah James was 37, the weight of silence had become his signature. He was no longer just the boy who had witnessed injustice or the teenager who stood his ground in a cafeteria. He had become a federal judge, a man who didn't wear his scars on his sleeve, but wove them into every ruling, every pause, before the gavel dropped. When the appointment was announced, the headline in the local paper read, "Selma native returns to rewrite the rules." But for Micah, it was never about rewriting. It was about remembering. The courtroom wasn't a stage for him. It was a sanctuary, a reckoning, a place where memory and law were forced to look each other in the eye. He didn't walk in with swagger. He walked in with weight. The kind of weight that made even seasoned prosecutors sit straighter. The kind that reminded you not all power needs to be loud to be final. Micah presided with grace, but never softness. He gave time to those who rarely got it. He listened longer than most judges dared to. And when he spoke, it wasn't to echo precedent. It was to challenge it. He ruled on housing cases where black families were being priced out by design. He struck down voter ID laws that were crafted to silence the very voices his parents once marched for. And when a police officer stood trial for the beating of a handcuffed teenager, Micah read the verdict without blinking. His voice didn't tremble. But those in the room did. They said his courtroom felt different, not because it was tense, but because it was sacred. For the first time in a long time, justice didn't feel like an abstract word carved in marble above the bench. It felt like something living, breathing, and possible. He never named the officers who killed his parents. He never mentioned them from the bench. But in every case that touched on racial profiling, on systemic neglect, on broken trust between people and the institutions meant to protect them, Micah's presence alone was a statement. You will not erase what you fear to face. He often stayed late after court, long after the bailiffs had gone home. Some nights, he'd sit in the empty courtroom, hands folded in front of him, eyes on the same bench where his parents once waited for answers that never came. He didn't cry. He reflected. And then he wrote. Notes, questions, reflections that weren't part of any official record, but were part of his own. His code. His covenant. He hung no plaques. He took no credit. When a reporter asked him why he never ran for office, Micah replied, "Because laws can shape systems, but presence shapes people. I'm here for the people." One afternoon, a former student returned from college and hugged him so hard they nearly fell over. The student whispered, "When they tried to make me feel small, I remembered how you stood." Micah smiled, patted the boy's back, and said, "Then the stand worked." He didn't come back to be a hero. He came back to multiply what hope had once given him, and by doing so, he reminded a forgotten corner of America that justice isn't just something you fight for in court. It's something you grow, teach, and pass on, one quiet act at a time. Micah James never used the word legacy. He didn't trust it. To him, legacy sounded too final, too polished, like something written on a plaque instead of into people. What mattered to Micah wasn't being remembered, what people would do with what he left behind. In the years after founding the Quiet Stand, the work deepened. It wasn't about numbers or headlines. It was about reach. And the reach of one man who refused to raise his voice, but never lowered his standard, became quietly radical. Schools began using his workshops as part of restorative justice programs, and juvenile detention centers reached out for guidance. Students who had once been labeled as problems, too loud, angry, and distracted, found new language for their pain. In group circles, they repeated what Micah once said. The world will try to name you before you name yourself. Don't let them. His presence lingered even when he wasn't in the room. Teachers quoted him without realizing it. Parents referenced his approach when talking to their kids. "Pull a Micah" became a phrase whispered in crowded hallways when someone stayed calm under pressure. It wasn't about imitation. It was about intention. He showed people how to stand without posturing, how to assert truth without disrespect. He taught that dignity isn't something others can hand you. You decide not to put down, no matter who tries to take it. Micah didn't just teach students. He mentored young lawyers, counselors, and activists. He reminded them that justice wasn't just about knowledge, but about posture. "People will test your balance," he told them. "Don't let their chaos become your rhythm." He never ran for office, never wrote a memoir, but his influence threaded through courtrooms, classrooms, and community centers. He was proof that a man didn't need to be loud to be heard, or in power to be powerful. One day, a young woman who had attended his sessions returned to speak at a local middle school. She had once been suspended 3 times in a single semester. Now she was in her final year of law school. After her speech, she walked back into the quiet stand, hugged Micah, and said, "You never told me who to become. You just showed me it was possible." Micah smiled. "That's all I ever wanted." He didn't hang awards on the wall. Instead, he framed letters from kids who said, "I didn't think someone like me could lead until I saw you." Or, "Your silence taught me how to hear myself." His methods spread to cities he'd never set foot in. People didn't always use his name, but his fingerprints were there, in how facilitators handled tension, in the language of self-control and calm strength, and in how communities learned to respond instead of react. Micah James never needed the spotlight. He became the light that people followed through dark systems, not by shouting, but by showing, not by demanding power, but by living in a way that made others feel powerful too. He didn't leave a legacy. He left a path, and people are still walking it, head high, voice steady, heart whole. The final chapter of Micah James's story didn't come with a parade or a headline. It came the way most important things do, quietly, steadily, without spectacle. In the final years of his life, Micah remained exactly who he had always been, deliberate, thoughtful, and present. While others chased platforms and microphones, he focused on small rooms with folding chairs, honest questions, and youth who hadn't yet learned to distrust their voices. He never spoke of retirement. He said he didn't believe in stepping away from purpose. "So long as I can listen," he once said, "I've got work to do." And so, he kept showing up. Courtroom panels, town halls, and weekend sessions at the quiet stand. He sat with families in grief and with boys on the edge of arrest. Not to fix, not to judge, but to witness. And that, he believed, was holy work. He taught not through sermons, but through steadiness. His health began to falter in his final months, but not his clarity. He moved more slowly, but his words grew sharper. A young man once asked, "Aren't you tired of fighting?" Micah smiled. "I'm not fighting. I'm remembering." The city didn't know how to say goodbye. They tried banners and interviews. He declined them all. Instead, he left a letter, simple, handwritten, framed in the lobby of the quiet stand. It read, "This was never about me. If you were seen here, carry that forward. If you found calm here, share it louder than noise. And if you learn to stand, don't wait for a crowd to prove you're tall." Micah passed on a Wednesday morning. The sky was clear. The courthouse lowered its flag. Local schools held moments of silence. And for a full day, the quiet stand didn't open its doors, not out of grief, but reverence. But by the following Saturday, it opened again. Not with speeches, but with footsteps. Dozens of students, parents, former inmates, educators, lawyers, and grandmothers. They gathered not to mourn, but to continue. One by one, they took turns reading aloud from the notebooks Micah had left behind. Not law books, reflections, phrases, questions like, "What would change if you believed you belonged? How do you defend your peace without swinging? Who have you forgiven that still doesn't know?" It wasn't a service. It was a rise. And in the weeks that followed, the work didn't stop. Young people who had once sat in his circle began leading new circles. Former students taught new classes. One mural was painted on the side of the building, Micah's silhouette, head slightly bowed, with the words beneath, "You don't have to be loud to be legendary." His name faded from headlines, but it lived on in actions. How a girl at a traffic stop now knew how to speak with both calm and authority. How a teacher changed the way he addressed defiant kids, and how a once violent boy now ran de-escalation training at the community center. Micah James didn't vanish. He became the stillness we carry, a quiet kind of revolution, the kind that outlives the man. Because sometimes the loudest sound in history is how someone walks away without saying a word. Micah James never needed a podium. He didn't need crowds to know he was right. He stood without spectacles. He moved without permission. And somehow, that was more powerful than any protest sign or shouted slogan. In a world addicted to noise, Micah made stillness feel louder. You saw what he did. You felt it. But now ask yourself, what if it had been you? Would you have stood beside him, or looked away? Would you have said something, or filmed it for later? We live in a time where every reaction is watched. Dignity can be stripped with a laugh, and fear wears a uniform. Micah didn't just stand up for himself. He stood for all the moments when the world told someone like him to sit down. And now, the question lingers. What will you do the next time silence is safer, but truth is louder? Because maybe that's the real story here. Not just who Micah was, but what he awakened. In me, in you, in all of us who have ever swallowed our anger, lowered our gaze, or walked away when we should have stayed. This isn't the end. It never was. It's the beginning of 100 new stories waiting to be lived. So tell yours, in the comments, in your homes, in the following complicated conversation. If this story made your chest ache, throat tighten, or sit up straighter, don't let it go. Could you share it? Subscribe. And stay with us, because this is not just content. This is how we remember who we are and who we refuse to become. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next story.